Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to present to you the top 10 Warhammer 40k armies of January 2020. In this series of videos I go over the armies that had the most top placings in GT and major ITC tournaments during a certain month, and in this case it's the month of January. Normally I take the top 5 placings from each major and GT to come up with these rankings, but this year we will only be using the top 4 placings from GT and majors, but we'll also be using the top 8 placings from major events that have over 100 players. And I would like to start calling these extremely large tournaments super majors, which is a term they use over in the competitive Smash Brothers Melee community, which I would like to adopt for our game as well. The reason I wanted to make this change is because I feel it is much more difficult to place even 8th place at a super major than it is to get second at some GTs or majors. So the top 8 placings from super majors will count as better placings for these rankings on these videos. Like last year though, we will still be categorizing armies codex by codex, meaning all the chapters from the Space Marine Codex will be considered Space Marine armies, while armies like Blood Angels and Space Wolves will be considered their own armies because they have their own codex. Also, I will still determine the main faction of an army list based on which faction had the most points spent on it. So for example, if a list had 1200 points of Blood Angels and 800 points of Astra Militarum, then I will consider that army to be a Blood Angel army with Astra Militarum allies. And that's pretty much all you need to know to understand how the rankings in these videos work. But before we hop into the actual rankings and the main content of this video, I need to let you all know about the sponsor of this video because I need to pay some bills. Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a free-to-play RPG game for mobile, but is now available for PC. If you like traditional RPG games, then you'll probably really like this game. It's easy to get into and can actually be a pretty fun time killer. You can battle your way through the campaign to unlock new champions to add to your team, or get new artifacts to upgrade your team. I recently acquired some shards that give me some new champions, so I opened them up and I got this Space Wolf looking champ and this Slanesh Demon looking champ. If you discover that a champion isn't that great or doesn't synergize well with your team, then you can use them as food to upgrade your better characters that you do like. So every champion is worthwhile. Alongside the main campaign battles of this game, there is also PvP, which is player versus player, which is my personal favorite part of any game that I play. Also, if you make an account within the next 30 days, you'll get a bonus 100,000 silver and the new champion Hexweaver. In order to claim these bonuses, you just have to sign up through the link in the description of this video, log into your account, and then click this chest icon that I'm showing on screen right now. And again, this game is cross-platform playable, so you can play it on your phone or your PC, or switch between both. It's free to play, so there's no harm in at least checking it out. Click the link down in the description of this video or in the pinned comment to download Raid Shadow Legends, claim your bonuses, and try out the game today. And now with that said, let's get into the top 10 armies of January. So this time around, we actually only have 9 placings altogether on this list, but 14 armies overall. This is because January only had 8 GT major and super major events combined. So because of this, a lot of the placings are ties, which is why there's a lot of armies but less placings. So I guess we can consider this a top 9 armies or top 14 armies or however you want to look at it. So now let's stop wasting time and let's just dive right into it. Number 9, Adeptus Mechanicus. The Steampunk Boys come in 9th this month with one 4th place finish at a GT. So the new meta for AdMech at the moment is spamming the newest transports, the Dune Riders, and filling them up with Plasma Caliber Vanguards or some Electro Priests. Stygies still looks to be the go-to Forge World because of the -1 to hit trait, which makes the army a bit more durable against shooting armies, and also because the Slingshot stratagem that allows them to move units up the board before the game even begins. This isn't necessarily a new strategy either. We've seen this done with big units of Dragoons in the past, and also with Tech Priests in the past, but instead inside the Forge World drill transport. But now with the addition of these new cheap Dune Riders, they seem to be the go-to for AdMech armies since it still works well with getting those Electro Priests turn 1 charges. They also use some Scorpius Disintegrators, which provide some good firepower, or even artillery firepower that doesn't need line of sight, although this player opted for the heavy-hitting Ferromite Cannon instead, probably due to it being a bit more reliable in the Space Marine meta we are currently in, since Space Marines are taking up close to 1/3 of all armies in the meta at this time. A new addition to a lot of AdMech armies as well is the inclusion of an Inquisitor who brings some psychic spells to AdMech without messing up their Forge Roll bonus, and also provides some new stratagems as well, like the Super Orbital Bombardment. Number 8, Deathwatch, Tau Empire, and Necrons. So these armies all had a single 3rd place finish at a GT or major event during January to tie them all up for this spot. For the Deathwatch list, they took a Librarian, Watchmaster, and 4 big units of mixed veterans. Lots of Stormbolters to make use of their special issue ammunition, which either gives them extra AP, which is good against Marines, or wounding on 2s, which makes them good against Hordes. They include a bike with a Teleport Homer, which is basically a get out of jail free card. The bike allows the unit to leave combat and charge again if needed, and the Teleport Homer allows the unit to teleport across the battlefield to the home Homer. A Vanguard veteran is included, which allows the unit to leave combat and shoot again, and with Terminator models included, they make the unit fearless as long as the Terminator is still alive, and also gives it 2-up armor save to try to block some of those 0 AP shots that come at them. The unit is also equipped with a bunch of storm shields to eat up high AP shots that come at them. So lots of utility in this unit since they can never really be tied down, and they are also great at shooting and in melee, especially after the addition of the shock assault rule. As allies, they also brought along some Blood Angels, but we will talk more about them later on in this video, so I guess spoiler alert. For the Tau, there really isn't much to say. It's the same old Triptide list with a few variations like the inclusion of Kroot, Dalek Grek, and some stealth battle suits, which saw some points reductions in the most recent chapter approved. So I guess the big takeaway from this list is that Triptide and drones and the commanders is still the core of meta Tau lists, but with the points reductions of a lot of units in chapter approved, it looks like Tau players are experimenting with new units and seeing some good results with them. And for the Necrons, we have a pretty unique list. It isn't the Doom 6 like we're used to, and instead it only includes 3 Doomsday Arcs from the Doom 6. This list features some Tesseract Arcs, Destroyer, a Tree Arc Stalker, and a Catan. The Tree Arc gives rerolls to the army if they shoot at the same target that the Stalker shot at. The guns on the Tesseract Arcs look like they can be pretty decent at killing Marines, and same with the Destroyers. And the Catan comes with some pretty good abilities that dump out mortal wounds, and also some good close combat attacks that would also be good against Marines. And best of all, it comes with a redeployment ability that allows himself and D3 Necron units to be redeployed up to 12 inches away from enemy models. So this has pretty good alpha strike potential if used offensively, or even defensive potential to hide some units if you lost first turn. Overall, I really like the look of this list for the current meta, and I'm happy to be seeing something different coming out of Necrons other than just the Doom 6. Number 7. Thousand Sons, Astra Militarum, and Drukhari. So again, lots of ties this time around since there were only a few events during January. All of these armies had a single second place finish at a GT or Major during January. For the Thousand Sons army, it's basically mortal wound spam. Lots of Thousand Sons characters with a few Tzeentch demons and some reinforcement points to summon in some more Tzeentch demons. I assume they would summon in a blob of pink horrors to make a bigger screen for all the characters, but I guess they left points open instead of just putting them into the list in case they wanted to bring a 4th Demon Prince or a Lord of Change or whatever suited the matchup at that time. Almost like a sideboard that card games would have like Magic the Gathering. I see that they opted to take the Dark Matter Crystal as a relic, but to be honest, I can't see why. Maybe to reposition for a better summoning position on the next turn, maybe to get a better target for their spells. Not entirely sure, to be honest. I'd have to ask the player why they took that relic. They also took Be'lakor as well, who hasn't really seen much play on top tables in a very long time, so it's nice to see him again. For the guard, this player took an interesting list compared to what we usually see on top tables. It's a Catachan Brigade, but there are no tank commanders, no basilisks, no wyverns, and no Bulgrin. Instead, they still took Strachan and a ton of infantry with a priest, 3 company commanders, 3 astropaths, an Ogren bodyguard, some rough riders, a couple of scout sentinels, 2 Cyclops demolition vehicles, and a heavy weapons team that has last cannons. So the last cannons on the heavy weapon team is probably because mortars are kinda shit now. They went up a ton of points, and in the Space Marine meta don't really accomplish much. But with last cannons, you can place your squad pretty far back so that they are usually out of range of the enemy guns, while still being in range to shoot their last cannons. Also, 63 points for 3 last cannons is pretty damn cheap, and the only stuff that can really reach that far are usually other anti-tank weapons, and if the enemy is wasting their anti-tank on your heavy weapons team, then I think that's perfectly fine, and is a decent trade. For the Cyclops demolition vehicles, they are these little suicide bombers that explode and auto-hit all units within 6 inches of it, causing 2d6 hits per unit at strength 9, minus 2 AP, and D3 damage a pop. So if this thing goes off in the enemy lines, it can do a ton of damage. The problem I find with it is that it's incredibly easy to kill, but for 60 points, it's whatever. If it dies without doing anything, then that's fine, but if it does get in range and does do something, it'll usually do something great. So I think it's a pretty good pickup as a tax unit to fill out the heavy support part of your brigade. And the Ogren bodyguard is just there to protect characters by eating wounds for them, because snipers are super popular in this meta, with Raven Guard being a thing, and even other Space Marine chapters just taking a bunch of eliminators as well. He's also a character himself, so it's not like the enemy can just gun him down before trying to snipe out your characters. He will be there to eat at least 2/3 of the wounds that your characters suffer from sniper fire. This Astra Militarum player also opted to bring some Blood Angels and White Scar allies, but we will talk about those later on in the video. And then we have the Drukhari, which was piloted by my buddy Scary from Scarredcast. Everything seems somewhat standard about this list, except for a few things. First is the choice of bringing Void Raymonds. Second is that he brought a custom Witch Cult, and third is that he brought Drazar. For the custom from Cult, he chose Test of Skill and Berserk Fugue. So Berserk Fugue gives exploding hits on 6s for melee attacks, so pretty good for the witches since they get a ton of attacks to begin with. And Test of Skill gives +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles, which can be alright for the witches, but is much better suited for the Razor Wings that are in that detachment, since now their disintegrator cannons will wound most vehicles and monsters on 4+ instead of 5+. And Drazar with his new update is a beast. I've been wanting to test him out for a while now, but haven't been able to pick up the model for myself, so I haven't had the chance. But on paper, that guy does look awesome, and so does the model. Number 6, Chaos Knights and Sisters of Battle. Yet another tie. Both these armies had a single first place finish at a GT or Major during January. For the Chaos Knights list, there isn't a whole lot to say. 3 big knights with double thermal cannons, good at shooting and melee, while also being pretty beefy, and a battalion of Alpha Legion to get some command points, and also a Disco Lord making use of the Soul Forged pack formation all by himself. And a big unit of bikers, assumingly making use of the Endless Cacophony and Veterans combo, while also being a fast, semi-durable unit that can grab objectives quickly or tie something up in combat that you don't want shooting. As for the Sisters list, they brought a detachment of Valorous Heart, which makes their units ignore the AP from -1 AP weapons that are being shot at them. But with the inclusion of an Imagifier, they ignore -2 AP from weapons that have a -2 AP as well. So essentially, they always get their 3+ armor save unless being shot at by a weapon with -3 or better AP. They also brought Celestine, who is still one of the best characters in the game in my opinion. She's super cheap for what she can accomplish. And they also have 3 Seraphim squads with a couple of Inferno Bolters in each squad. I assume these gals deep strike in and then use their strat to gain an extra 6 inches on their pistols so they can be in range to shoot with their Inferno pistols when they deep strike in. And that same stratagem allows them to shoot when they deep strike in while also being able to shoot later on in the normal shooting phase. Then they have a Vanguard detachment of Bloody Rose, which gives those units an extra -1 AP on their close combat attacks and an extra attack per model. So that Zephyrim squad gets 31 attacks and -4 AP when they're in combat. Pretty nutty. Number 5, Chaos Space Marines. So Chaos Space Marines had 2 third-place finishes at GT and Majors during the month of January. I unfortunately only have one list though. I have no clue what I did with the second one. So the list that I do have to show you guys and gals is the new Possessed Bomb. This list takes 20 Possessed, buffs them up to the high heavens, and makes them untargetable, so that way they can walk up the board without being shot at, and then eventually just mulch through the entire enemy army. So the idea is that you take 20 Nurgle Mark Possessed in the Demonkin Ritualist formation, which opens them up to buffs from Chaos Space Marine spells and prayers, but also Nurgle Demon spells, and they also have access to a really good Warlord trait buff and some stratagems from that formation. So you make your Master of Possession the Warlord, and give him the Warlord trait from the formation, which makes it so that the Possessed do mortal wounds on unmodified wound rolls of 6+ when within 6 inches of that Master of Possession. You then have a stratagem to give the Possessed +1 strength and +1 attack, which is from that formation. You also give them the Prayer from one of your Apostles that gives them +1 to wound in close combat, while also using Veterans of the Long War for another +1 in close combat, and also Virulent Blessing from a Chaos Demon Psyker for another +1 to wound in close combat, while also doing double damage on wound rolls of 7+. This means that for your wound rolls of 4+, you do double your damage, and you pretty much wound everything in the game on 2s, while also doing mortal wounds in addition on unmodified 6s. You also use the spell from the Master of Possession to give them reroll 1s to hit and 1s to wound while they're within 6 inches of them, and Cursed Earth, which gives them a 4+ invulnerable save to try to keep them alive while they're in close combat. You also have a Sorcerer give them Prescience so they hit on 2+, and Warp Time to get them into combat quicker. So essentially, to summarize it, they will murder any unit in the game they get in combat with, and then some. I'm pretty sure you could kill 2 knights at the same time with this one unit. So they are amazing offensively. So how do you get them up the board? Well, you spend 1 command point to give the Disco Lord a Warlord trait using the new Alpha Legion stratagem, and you give him the Clandestine Warlord trait, which gives him an additional -1 to hit on top of Alpha Legion's -1 to hit. Then you use a prayer from another Apostle to give him another -1 to hit. Then you use Miasma of Pestilence on that Disco Lord for another -1 to hit, so he's -4 to hit in total. You then put him out front of your Possessed so that he's closer to the enemy than they are, and then you use the stratagem Conceal on the Possessed, which makes it so that the enemy can't shoot at them unless they are the closest visible model. So now the opponent has to somehow find a way to kill a -4 to hit Disco Lord. With that said, he only gets to be -4 if the Possessed player gets to go first. If they go second, then the best he can get at is -3, but even then, some armies literally can't hit him, like Guard or Tau. On top of that, if they somehow do get through the -4 to hit Disco Lord, you have 3 Plague Burst Crawlers to put out front as well, which are a bitch to try to kill with their toughness 8, 3+ save, 5+ invulnerable save, and 5+ feel no pain. So it's an amazing delivery system to get those Possessed into combat, where they will just mulch the enemy into dust. Overall, I think this list list is incredibly strong, but not necessarily unbeatable. We saw some of the best Chaos players in the world running this list at the LVO, or a variation of it, and none of them did amazingly well. It seems as though Space Marines still have their number. Also, with the introduction of the new Grey Knight rules, I see Grey Knights being somewhat of a counter to this list. 4 damage smites against pretty much everything in the entire list. That's an easy way to deal with that Disco Lord if the Chaos player doesn't screen out the smites very well. I don't want to go as far to say that Grey Knights hard counter the Possess Bomb, but I do think they have a decent matchup against it in theory. Also, Tau getting that new stratagem for max number of hits for a Navarra battlesuit, that will also be a pretty good answer for that -4 to hit Disco Lord as well. The problem after that though is not dying to the 20 Super Saiyan Possessed coming in full force after that Disco Lord goes down. So although I do think the Possess Bomb is definitely high tier, I do think that it does have some decent counters, which stops it from being the best army in the game. Number 4. Orcs. The Great Wa comes in 4th this month due to a 6th place finish at a Super Major and a 1st place finish at a GT. So the first list is somewhat standard from what we've seen, but instead of Ludas, they brought some tank bustas, and they also brought the Dreadwall formation with 3 shock attack guns. So I assume the tank bustas use the deep strike stratagem in order to avoid being shot and to get in range fairly easily on turn 2 or 3, while also being placed near some well positioned grots for grot shields if they need it. And the shock attack guns just blast stuff from across the table with immunity since they are characters, making use of the double shoot stratagem from the Dreadwall detachment. They also get to reroll a single hit roll, a single wound roll, and damage roll because they are Death Skulls. And they have a stratagem to reroll all wounds against a vehicle if they need it as well. And for the second Orc list, it's very different since it has 0 boys in it, it's all Gretchen, characters, and flash kits. This is the weirdest list I think I've ever seen from Orcs, but it kinda makes sense for our current meta. You have some shock attack guns that will never be touched because of their range and the character rule blasting from across the table, and a million grots to protect the flash kits as they go up the board shooting stuff with their strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage guns. 30 shots from each squad and they hit on 4s, while still having Daka Daka Daka. They also have an ability where they roll dice after they shoot, and on a 6 they can shoot again, but it has to be at the closest target. So this will rarely go off, but when it does, it's a bunch of extra shots. They are also freebooters too, so they gain +1 to hit if a unit within 24 inches of the flash kits kills something that turn. So something like one of the shock attack guns can easily trigger this to give the flash kits +1 to hit so that they hit on 3s. And with the profile on the guns that they have, they actually look like they'd be pretty decent at killing Space Marines in this meta. So I think that might be why this list actually did so well. I also think this list looks alright to be honest, but to me feels kinda situational and gimmicky, and really kind of only works in the Space Marine meta that we're in at this point in time. But with that said, kudos to the person who came up with it and figuring out how to counter the meta a little bit. And now, in this part of the video, is where I would normally give the honorable mentions. So armies that placed well at events during January, but didn't quite make the list. But every army that did place top 4 at a GT or Major, or top 8 at a Super Major, is already on the main list because there were so many ties due to a lack of events overall. So I guess into the top 3 armies we go. Number 3, Blood Angels. That is correct, I did say Blood Angels. They had a 1st place finish at a Major and a 6th place finish at a Super Major to get them into the top 3 for January. Blood Angels had a really good update with the Blood of Baal Psychic Awakening book. And by the way, I know it's supposed to be pronounced Baal, but because of Diablo 2, I call it Baal. It's just stuck in my head. So Blood Angels, in the new Psychic Awakening book, gained an updated Red Thirst that still gives them the +1 to wound when they charge, get charged, or heroically intervene, but it now also gives them +1 to their charge rolls, making it even easier to get charges off with this army. They also have access to litanies now, so instead of just the +1 to charge, they can get a +2 to charge from a litany, or exploding hits in melee on 6s. They also got some cool stratagems for Sanguinary Guard. There's one to make them -1 to hit, and another stratagem to make it so that their D3 damage rolls of 1, they count as 2 damage instead, which makes them way more consistent at killing anything Space Marine. One thing that has remained a constant for Blood Angels though, even after the Blood of Baal update, is that they are much better with allies than they are as a mono army. Originally, they used to be paired with Guard a lot, and more recently, they've been paired with vanilla Space Marines like Imperial Fists or Iron Hands. This way, the vanilla Marines can deal with the screen through superior shooting, while the Blood Angel stuff eventually gets into combat to murder it in glorious melee combat. For a lot of vanilla chapters, you normally want to play them as mono because the buffs they get for being mono are incredibly good and easily accessible because they either start on turn 1 or turn 2, so either in the Devastator Doctrine or Tactical Doctrine. But for Blood Angels, they only get their solo army bonus in turn 3 and on. And even then, it's just +1 attack when they charge or get charged or heroically intervene, which don't get me wrong, is nice, but it's not necessarily needed. Since after Shock Assault became a thing, Space Marines get a good amount of attacks already, so forcing yourself to be mono makes your melee attacks a tiny bit more potent, but it doesn't really outweigh the benefits of bringing a small but superior gun line to clear the way for the Blood Angels to get some good charge targets. Plus, having access to stuff like Tremor Shells or double shooting Thunderfire cannons is really good. Overall, I'm really happy to see that the Sons of Sanguinius are back in the top 10s again. It's been a long time coming. Number 2. Craft Worlds. The Pointy Ears are back at number 2 this month with a 2nd place finish at a major and a 3rd place finish at a super major. So it looks like Shining Spears are back in the meta again. And I assume it's pretty much due to the current meta of Space Marines and also some buffs that they got in Phoenix Rising. So there is a new ability that you can give Shining Spears called Withdraw, which allows them to leave combat at the end of the fight phase. So this ability is perfect for charging a unit, killing it, wrapping up another unit so that that unit can't leave combat and your unit can't be shot at, and then on your opponent's turn at the end of their fight phase, you leave combat with Withdraw, so you're free to shoot and charge again on your turn. It requires a bit of finesse and knowledge of the charge and fight phase to make this army work though, but when played correctly, it can be devastating. Their shooting is pretty strong just because of how many shots they get, and the turn that they charge, they can do a ton of damage with their lances. Dark Reapers are also coming back into the meta as well. They now have even longer range than they used to because of a buff from Phoenix Rising, so they can park in the back of the board and just blast stuff for most of the game until the enemy gets close enough to shoot them, which is hard to do when they have 3 big units of jet bikes in their face stopping them from getting there. We also see some support weapons being used. To be honest, I have no clue what these even are. Don't think I've ever seen them before. And we also have Jane Czar, who is a pretty decent character now with the buffs from Phoenix Rising. And in the second list, we have a bunch of spears again, but some Harlequin allies that feature some more bikes, and the Incarn. To be honest, I love the look of this list and would actually consider trying it myself. And now, the best army of January, you guessed it, Space Marines. Space Marines had 22 placings in January, which to be fair is a little bit less than it has been for the last couple of months, but it's still a lot. It's getting kinda ridiculous and it doesn't look like their dominance is going to end anytime soon. They were everywhere at the LVO this year, and for those of you who don't know what the LVO is, it's an 800-person tournament that ends the ITC season. It is literally the biggest 40k tournament in the world. Nothing else even comes close. So at this event, Space Marines took up roughly around 27% of the playing field at the LVO, according to the stats provided to me by the guys who run the 40k Stats website and the 40k Stats Center podcast. Speaking of which, if you like hearing about the hard numbers and statistics of this game, like the win rates for each army and how many times certain armies are brought to tournaments each month, and many other statistics about the competitive scene, go check out 40kstats.com and also their podcast 40k Stats Center. This isn't a sponsorship, by the way. I'm not getting paid to say this. I genuinely think that what they are doing for the hobby and the information they are providing is amazing for our community. So make sure to go show them some love as well if you're interested in seeing those numbers. Speaking of interesting numbers, there were more Intercessor models on tables at the LVO than there were Orc Boys. And yes, that's models, not units. And there were also more Assault Centurion models than there were Gene Stealer models. That is pretty nuts when you think about it. So Space Marines are massively overrepresented right now, and taking over the meta as you can see by those numbers, and also by how many top placing Space Marine armies are getting each month. Iron Hands is the most represented on top tables out of all the chapters from the Space Marine Codex, with Raven Guard falling into second. Iron Hands essentially have rules on top of rules on top of rules on top of more rules, and basically answers for everything, while Raven Guard just hits fast and hard, and also has the best magic trick in the game where they make enemy characters disappear. A new combo was also shown at the LVO with the new Unkillable Iron Hands Dread. We thought it was over after their previous FAQ, but apparently it's not. You just stack the Ironstone plus Duty Eternal on this single Dread to negate a ton of damage. Plus you still have your 4+ invulnerable save, and you can pass off wounds to infantry if your Dread is a character, essentially turning it into a Riptide that has drones, but your drones are intercessors that can kill stuff as well, while also having a 5+ Feel No Pain because of an upgraded Apothecary, who can also bring back your quote-unquote drones from the dead. It's kind of dumb, and hopefully gets fixed in the next April FAQ or sooner. As for the Raven Guard, they spam something like 15 Centurions, which is 2 units of Assault Centurions and a big unit of Grav Centurions. So for Raven Guard, they use a stratagem to deep strike the Assault Centurions. Then they can take a Warlord trait to infiltrate a unit 9 inches away from the enemy before the game begins. So if they get first turn, they infiltrate the giant Grav Dev unit, use some litanies on them like +1 to wound and +1 to hit, and then they use the Grav stratagem to reroll wounds and damage. And then they just go to town on the enemy while being in Devastator Doctrine for the extra AP. Then turn 2, they have the option to switch to the Tactical Doctrine, drop in their Assault Centurions who have 11-inch -1 AP flamers because because of a custom chapter trait, and a ton of -1 AP hurricane bolter shots that can rapid fire at 24 inches because Centurions always benefit from the bolter discipline. It was the other day at a tournament when I played against this list myself, specifically a person who was imitating Brad Chester's list, who plays second place at the LVO, and it was in this game that I realized Assault Centurions are actually a shooting unit that happens to also be good in melee. They don't even really need to get into combat to wreak havoc on the enemy, and if they do get into combat, they will tear up whatever they get into combat with as well. The army's biggest weakness is that it gives up the secondary gangbusters, but it kinda doesn't matter when your opponent doesn't have an army left at the end of turn 2. Other than those two chapters though, the other Space Marine chapters aren't quite as dominant. So personally, I think it's only those two chapters that need to be changed in some way to level the playing field, or actually, I think Iron Hands need some rules tweaks to the Ironstone, Stratagems, and their Super Doctrine, and to be honest for Raven Guard, I think it's just Centurions that need a points increase. I think that would solve everything for both armies essentially, but I guess we will have to wait and see what the April FAQ brings us. And that's going to be it for this video. I'm sorry it was a longer one than usual, but there were 14 armies to talk about instead of just 10 due to all the ties. And I also felt the video needed a long explanation since it's the first one of the year and the beginning of season 3 of this series. So in future videos, the intro explanation won't be as long, or I might even just drop it altogether and put it in the description of the video to save time for the people who constantly watch these top 10s since you guys already know how the list works. Overall, I'm kind of happy where the meta is at the moment. To be honest, I don't mind Space Marines all that much, at least not as much as others do, but then again, I am currently playing my Imperial Fists in tournaments, so I guess I have a little bit of a bias there. And personally, I haven't really had any trouble against the meta Raven Guard list. I assume the April FAQ will do something to change at least Raven Guard and Iron Hands, otherwise we will probably be seeing a lot more of them in the future. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon to be notified when I make more videos like this. Also, feel free to check me out on Patreon where you can sign up for some custom lists built by myself or even some coaching from myself. And you also gain exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord that is full of a ton of great people to chat with. And also, thanks to all my current patrons, you guys and gals are awesome, and I honestly can't thank you all enough for helping support me and my channel so that I can continue to make videos like this. Without you guys and gals, this channel definitely wouldn't be possible for me. So thanks again. So anyways, thanks again for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Happy wargaming.